Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the massive space station grow larger through the cracked viewport. Coalition Station Omega was the size of a small moon, its gleaming metal surface covered with docking, bays, and weapon platforms. Ships from across the galaxy moved around it like metal fish swimming through space. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and looked at his reflection in the dark screen next to him. At 35, he already had gray streaks in his brown hair. 3 months ago, he had been commanding cargo runs between Earth and Mars. Now he was supposed to represent all of humanity in the most important military alliance in the galaxy. "Captain, we're getting some strange looks from the other ships," said Amy Rodriguez from her navigation station. She was young, maybe 26, with short black hair and nervous energy that never seemed to stop. Her fingers danced across controls that were older than she was. Jake turned to look at the main screen. Their ship was surrounded by vessels that looked like they came from science fiction movies. The Zentari ships were long and sharp like silver knives. The Vex Confederacy flew in perfect diamond formations, their hulls so smooth they seemed to bend light around them. The Ashanti Union ships looked like they were made of living crystal, changing colors as they moved. Then there was the Defiance. She had started life as a cargo hauler, built to carry mining equipment and food supplies between Earth's colonies. Her hull was patched with metal plates from 6 different manufacturers. The paint job was 3 different shades of gray because they had run out of matching paint halfway through. One of the main engines made a grinding noise that Chief Engineer Lisa Park said was normal, but it still made Jake nervous. "Sir, incoming transmission from the station," reported Pete Johnson from communications. Pete was a big man with thick hands that looked too large for the delicate control panels, but he could pull signals out of space static better than anyone Jake had ever seen. "Put it on screen, Pete." The face that appeared belonged to Admiral Krell of the Zentari Empire. His skin was blue-gray like old metal, and his yellow eyes looked like they were studying a particularly uninteresting bug. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel rolling down a hill. "Human vessel Defiance, you are cleared for docking bay 94. Follow the guide lights and try not to damage anything important." The transmission cut off before Jake could respond. Amy let out a small laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. "Docking bay 94, she said, checking her charts. "That's in the cargo section, sir, right between the garbage processing center and the spare parts storage." Jake nodded. He had expected something like this. When Earth had finally developed faster-than-light travel and asked to join the Galactic Defense Coalition, the response had been polite but cool. Humanity was welcome to contribute, they were told, but no one expected much from the newcomers. "Take us in, Amy. Nice and easy." The docking process took longer than it should have. The Defiance was built for simple straight-line approaches, not the complex spiral pattern that the station's traffic control demanded. Twice they had to back up and start over when Amy's calculations were off by a few degrees. Jake could see other ships moving smoothly through the same pattern like they had done it 1,000 times before. Finally, the docking clamps engaged with a loud clang that echoed through the ship. Jake could hear Lisa Park cursing creatively from somewhere in the engine room as various systems shut down in the wrong order. "Docking complete, sir," Amy announced. "Hull integrity is good, atmosphere is cycling normally, and the artificial gravity is only fluctuating by about 10%. "That's better than usual," Jake said, trying to sound positive. "Pete, any word on when the welcoming ceremony starts?" "In about 2 hours, sir. The message says all ship commanders should report to Conference Room Alpha wearing their dress uniforms." Jake looked down at his uniform. The jacket was earth navy blue with simple silver stripes on the sleeves. It looked plain and boring compared to the elaborate outfits he had seen in the Coalition's promotional videos. But it was clean and it fit properly. "Lisa, how are we looking down there?" he called into the ship's communication system. "Well, Captain," came Lisa's voice through the crackling speakers. "The good news is that we made it here in one piece. The bad news is that I'm not sure we'll make it back out again without some serious repairs. The port fusion reactor is running hot. The gravity generator is held together with spare wire, and I think something is living in the water recycling system." "Something living?" "It might just be a really aggressive form of algae. I'll let you know if it starts talking back to me. Jake shook his head. Lisa Park was the best engineer he had ever worked with, but she had a sense of humor that could be disturbing at the worst times. She was also the only person who could keep the Defiance running with spare parts and creative thinking. Ben, how are our weapons looking? Jake asked. Lieutenant Ben Carter looked up from his station. He was thin and quiet, with careful hands and patient eyes. Before joining the Navy, he had been a hunting guide in Alaska, which Jake thought was probably the best training possible for hitting targets that did not want to be hit. All systems are green, Captain. The railguns are loaded and ready, the missile tubes are armed, and the point defense lasers are online. It's not much compared to what these other ships are carrying, but everything works. Jake nodded. Their weapons were 50 years behind the Coalition standard, but they were simple and reliable. The railguns fired metal slugs using magnetic acceleration. The missiles used basic chemical explosives. The lasers were barely powerful enough to stop incoming projectiles. But Ben had spent weeks calibrating every system personally, and Jake trusted him completely. A chime sounded through the ship, indicating that the docking tube had pressurized and connected properly. Time to go meet our new allies, Jake announced. Amy, you have the bridge. Try not to let anything explode while I'm gone. I'll do my best, sir, but I'm not making any promises. Jake straightened his uniform jacket and headed for the airlock. Through the small window, he could see the clean, bright corridor of Coalition Station Omega, stretching away into the distance. Soon he would be face to face with the military leaders of 12 different species, representing civilizations that had been traveling between stars for longer than humans had been using metal tools. He hoped he would not embarrass his entire species too badly. 3 months had passed since the Defiance joined the Coalition fleet. Jake Morrison had hoped things would get better, but they had only gotten worse. The other ship commanders treated him and his crew like children playing with toys. Admiral Krell made jokes about humans in every meeting. The Vex officers spoke to each other in their own language when Jake was around, then laughed quietly. The worst part was the missions they were given. While the real warships patrolled the dangerous border regions, the Defiance was sent to escort supply convoys and transport diplomats. Safe, boring work that kept them far from any real action. Jake stood in the Coalition Command Center, watching the huge display screen that showed the entire galaxy. Red dots marked trouble spots. Green dots showed Coalition patrol routes. The human section was marked with a tiny blue dot, far from anything important. Captain Morrison, said Fleet Admiral Zara of the Hegemony. She was tall and thin, with silver skin and eyes like black mirrors. Her voice was calm and cold like winter wind. Your ship will escort the refugee transport leaving tomorrow for the Kepler colonies. Admiral, with respect, my crew and I came. Here to fight, Jake said. We want to contribute to the Coalition's defense efforts. Several alien officers made sounds that might have been laughter. Admiral Krell's yellow eyes glowed brighter, which Jake had learned meant the Zentari was amused. Captain Morrison, Krell said, his voice like grinding metal. Your ship is held together with scrap metal and hope. Your weapons are museum pieces. Your crew barely knows how to fly in formation. You contribute most by staying out of our way. Jake felt his face turn red, but before he could respond, alarms began screaming throughout the command center. The Baojiang main display changed, showing long-range sensor readings from the galaxy's outer rim. Report, Admiral Zara ordered. Ma'am, we're detecting a massive fleet approaching from the void between galaxies, said the sensor operator, a Vex officer with forearms and computer implants covering half his head. Configuration unknown. Energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. The display zoomed in on the approaching fleet. Jake felt his stomach drop. Hundreds of ships moved in perfect formation, each one the size of a Coalition cruiser but shaped like geometric nightmares. They were dark metal and sharp angles, with no lights except for red glows that pulsed like heartbeats. Void Hunters, whispered someone behind Jake. The name sent a chill through the command center. Jake had heard the stories. Machine intelligences from outside the galaxy that consumed entire star systems for raw materials. They had not been seen for over 300 years. All fleet commanders to your ships, Admiral Zara ordered. We move to intercept in 1 hour. This is a code black emergency. The command center exploded into activity. Officers ran to their stations. Communication systems buzzed with orders being sent to ships across the system. Jake started to follow the other captains, but Admiral Krell's voice stopped him. Not you, Morrison. The Defiance will remain here to coordinate refugee evacuations. This is real war, not a training exercise. Jake wanted to argue, but Admiral Zara was already giving orders to the real warships. The kilometer-long dreadnoughts of the Zentari Empire, the sleek destroyers of the Vex Confederacy, the living ships of the Ashanti Union that could repair themselves during battle. 2 hours later, Jake stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the battle through long-range sensors. The Coalition fleet was magnificent. Hundreds of advanced warships moved in perfect formation, their weapons creating light shows that could be seen across half the solar system. Captain, said Pete Johnson from his communication station, I'm picking up some strange transmissions from the enemy fleet. The computer can't translate them, but the patterns are weird. Weird how? It's like they're learning, sir. Each transmission is a little different from the last one, like they're adapting to our communication frequencies. Amy Rodriguez looked up from her navigation console. Sir, the enemy formation is changing. They're not fighting like any military force I've ever studied. It's more like they're solving a puzzle. On the main screen, the battle was not going as planned. The Void Hunter ships moved in swarms, surrounding individual coalition vessels and attacking from all angles at once. Their weapons seemed to change with each shot, adapting to whatever shields or armor they encountered. Captain, said Dr. Nancy Wright from her medical station, we're receiving wounded from the battle. Permission to convert Cargo Bay 2 into an emergency medical center? Do it, Nancy. Take whoever you need. Dr. Wright was small and quiet with gray hair and gentle hands that could work miracles when people were hurt. She had joined the crew because she wanted to help people, not because she wanted to see the galaxy. Now she was getting more patients than she could handle. The first wounded arrived an hour later. Zentari officers with burns from energy weapons, Vex pilots with radiation poisoning, Ashanti crew members whose crystal bodies had been cracked by kinetic impacts. They all told the same story. The enemy adapted too fast. Whatever weapons the Coalition used, the Void Hunters found a counter within minutes. It's not fair, said a young Zentari lieutenant as Nancy bandaged his arm. We hit them with everything we have and they just learn. They become immune to our weapons faster than we can switch to new ones. Jake walked among the wounded, trying to offer comfort. These were experienced soldiers from races that had been fighting wars for thousands of years. If they were scared, the situation was worse than anyone had admitted. Captain Morrison said, Pete from the bridge. Admiral Krell is requesting all available ships to fall back to defensive positions around the station. Jake looked at the tactical display. Half the Coalition fleet was already destroyed or disabled. The Void Hunters were advancing toward the station in a perfect sphere formation, their ships pulsing with red light like a mechanical heartbeat. Sir, said Ben Carter quietly, our weapons aren't in their database. Jake turned to look at his weapons officer. What do you mean? The enemy adapts to energy weapons, right? They learn to counter plasma cannons and particle beams and photon torpedoes. But our railguns just fire chunks of metal using magnetism. Our missiles use chemical explosives. Our lasers are barely strong enough to count as weapons. Amy spoke up from navigation. Ben's right, Captain. Everything we have is so old and simple that the enemy might not even recognize it as military technology. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was watching him with hopeful expressions. Outside, the most advanced military force in the galaxy was being destroyed by an enemy that could adapt to anything they threw at it. Pete, get me Admiral Zara, Jake said. Sir, I don't think they're accepting communications from us right now. Then patch me into the general fleet frequency. If they won't listen to requests, maybe they'll listen to warnings. Jake took a deep breath. What he was about to say would either save lives or get him court-martialed. Maybe both. Coalition fleet. This is Captain Morrison of the UES Defiance. I believe we have tactical information that could help in this engagement. The enemy adapts to advanced weapon systems, but they might be vulnerable to simple kinetic and chemical attacks. Request permission to engage and test this theory. The response came from Admiral Krell, and his voice was full of anger. Morrison, return to station immediately. This is not a time for human foolishness. Jake looked at his crew. They were ready. They had been ready for months. It was time to show the galaxy what humans could do when no one expected anything from them. Amy, plot a course toward the enemy fleet. Ben, load all railgun magazines and prep the missiles. Lisa, give me everything. The engines have got. Captain, said Pete quietly. Admiral Krell is ordering us to stand down. Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. Pete, I think our communication system just developed a malfunction. We can't hear any orders right now. The Defiance turned away from the safety of the station and headed toward the battle. Behind them, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were losing a war. Ahead of them, an enemy that could adapt to anything waited in the darkness. It was time to find out if being underestimated was actually an advantage. The Defiance moved through space like a wounded animal. Her engines coughed and sputtered, leaving a trail of sparks behind them. To the Void Hunters, she probably looked like another damaged coalition ship trying to escape the battle. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the enemy fleet grow larger on the main screen. Up close, the Void Hunter ships were even more terrifying. They moved without any visible engines, sliding through space like metal sharks. Their hulls were covered with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Captain, said Amy Rodriguez, from navigation, I'm reading 27 enemy vessels in the forward group. They're maintaining perfect formation, distance exactly 5 kilometers apart. They fight like a computer program, said Ben Carter, checking his weapons. Everything calculated and precise. Jake nodded. That was exactly what they were counting on. For the past week, while the Coalition licked their wounds from the first battle, Jake and his crew had been working on something they called Operation Scrapyard. Lisa Park had been busy in the engineering sections, welding and rewiring with the enthusiasm of someone building the world's most dangerous art project. She had taken mining lasers from the station's maintenance dock and mounted them as point defense weapons. The cargo bay had been converted into a missile factory using raw materials and explosives that she claimed were perfectly safe, although the way she said it made Jake nervous. Lisa, how are our special modifications looking? Jake asked into the ship's communication system. Well, Captain, the good news is that everything is working. The bad news is that I'm not entirely sure how. I've got shield generators from 3 different species all running through the same power grid. By all known laws of physics, we should have exploded an hour ago. What about the surprise package? Loaded and ready, sir, though I still think you're all completely insane. Jake smiled. Lisa had said the same thing when he explained the plan. So had Amy and Ben and Pete and Dr. Nancy Wright. Then they had all volunteered to help anyway, which was why he trusted them more than any officers he had ever served with. Pete, are you picking up any chatter from the enemy? Yes, sir, but it's weird. The transmissions are getting more complex, like they're sharing information about every weapon they encounter. Each ship seems to know instantly what happened to all the others. That's their strength, said Jake. But maybe it's also their weakness. The Defiance was now close enough to the enemy formation that Jake could see individual weapon ports on the Void Hunter ships. They were beautiful, in a cold, mechanical way, perfect curves and angles designed by mathematics instead of imagination. Ben, you ready? Lieutenant Ben Carter nodded, his hands steady on the firing controls. Rail guns loaded with standard kinetic rounds. Nothing fancy, just chunks of metal accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. Amy, take us into the asteroid field on my mark. Amy's fingers danced over her controls. The asteroid field had been declared impassable by Coalition Command. Too many rocks, too much debris, too dangerous for large military vessels. Perfect for a small, crazy ship with a pilot who had learned to fly by dodging space junk around. Earth's orbital shipyards now, Jake ordered. The Defiance dove toward the asteroid field like a bird escaping a cat. Behind them, the Void Hunter formation paused for exactly 2.3 seconds. Jake counted. Then they followed, their perfect formation adapting smoothly to the new terrain. First contact in 30 seconds, Amy announced. Ben, light them up. The rail, guns fired with a sound like thunder. Chunks of metal shot out at incredible speed. No energy signatures, no exotic particles, just simple kinetic energy doing what kinetic energy did best. The rounds hit the lead Void Hunter ship and punched clean through its hull. The ship spun out of control, venting atmosphere and sparks. Jake watched the tactical display, holding his breath. Would the enemy adapt? Would they suddenly develop armor that could stop kinetic rounds? Nothing happened. The damaged ship continued to drift, apparently unable to repair itself or adapt to such simple damage.
It worked, breathed Amy. They don't know how to deal with basic physics. Don't celebrate yet, Jake warned. Pete, what's the enemy chatter saying? They're confused, sir. The transmissions are getting chaotic. It's like they're trying to
analyze a weapon that doesn't exist in their database. The Defiance twisted through the asteroid field, using rocks as cover while Ben fired round after round. Each hit did exactly what it was supposed to do. Metal hit metal and metal broke. No adaptation, no immunity, just cause and effect. But the Void Hunters were learning in other ways. They began using the asteroids as weapons, pushing large rocks toward the Defiance with their tractor beams. They changed their formation to surround the human ship. Amy, get us out of here, Jake ordered. Working on it, Captain, but we've got company. 3 Void Hunter ships had moved to block their escape route. Their weapon ports were glowing with energy that made the space around them shimmer like heat waves. Lisa, now would be a good time for that surprise package. On its way, Captain. You might want to hold on to something. The cargo bay doors opened, and something shot out toward the enemy ships. It looked like a large metal barrel with fins welded on the sides. As it flew, it left a trail of what looked like glitter. What exactly is that thing? Jake asked. Officially, it's a mining charge designed for asteroid braking. Lisa's voice crackled through the speakers. Unofficially, it's about 3 tons of high explosive surrounded by metal fragments and ball bearings. I call it the universe's angriest piñata. The explosion lit up the asteroid field like a small sun. When the light faded, 2 of the Void Hunter ships were drifting wrecks. The 3rd was trying to flee, its perfect hull scarred and pitted by thousands of tiny impacts. Shrapnel, said Ben with something like wonder in his voice. They can adapt to energy weapons and particle beams, but they can't adapt to thousands of pieces of metal flying in random directions. The remaining Void Hunters seemed to pause, their formations becoming loose and uncertain. Jake could almost feel them trying to process what had just happened. How do you defend against weapons that work by being simple instead of sophisticated? Captain, said Pete, I'm getting a transmission from Admiral Krell. He's demanding to know what we just did. Tell him we'll explain later. Right now, we need to get back to the station and share this information with the fleet. As the Defiance limped home, Jake looked at his crew. They were dirty and tired, and their ship was held together with spare parts and stubbornness. But they had just done something that the most advanced military forces in the galaxy could not do. They had hurt the enemy that everyone said was unbeatable. Sir, said Amy quietly, look at the tactical display. Jake turned to the main screen. Throughout the battle zone, other coalition ships were beginning to change their tactics. A Zentari cruiser was firing old-style projectile weapons that it must have kept in storage. A Vex destroyer was using its manufacturing bay to create simple explosive devices. Word was spreading. The galaxy's most sophisticated military forces were learning to fight like humans. Simple, direct, and completely unpredictable. Dr. Nancy Wright's voice came over the communication system from the medical bay. Captain, I've been thinking about what we saw today. The enemy adapts to complex threats, but simple threats confuse them. Maybe the reason is that they're thinking like machines, trying to find optimal solutions to tactical problems. And humans don't think optimally, Jake said, understanding. Exactly. We do things that are inefficient, illogical, and wasteful, but sometimes inefficient is exactly what works. Jake smiled as he watched more coalition ships begin experimenting with unconventional weapons. The Void Hunters had made one critical error. They had assumed that more advanced always meant more dangerous. They were about to learn why that assumption could be fatal. The Coalition Command Center was busier than Jake Morrison had ever seen it. Officers from 12 different species crowded around display screens, arguing in languages that the translation computers struggled to keep up with. Data from the Defiance's attack had spread through the fleet like wildfire, and everyone wanted to understand how humans had succeeded where advanced weapons had failed. Jake stood near the back of the room, still wearing his patched flight suit and feeling out of place among the elaborate uniforms and ceremonial armor of the other commanders. Admiral Zara was speaking to a group of Vex tactical specialists, her silver fingers dancing over holographic displays that showed the battle from every possible angle. The human approach appears to violate several established principles of modern warfare, said Commander Thex of the Zentari cruiser Valor. He was younger than most Zentari officers, with bright yellow eyes that showed curiosity instead of the usual dismissal. Their weapons are inefficient, their tactics are unpredictable, and their equipment is held together with improvised repairs. Exactly, said Admiral Krell, his voice like grinding stone. It is chaos disguised as strategy. We cannot base our entire military doctrine on random acts of violence. Jake felt his face getting warm, but before he could respond, Commander Thex spoke again. With respect, Admiral, their random acts of violence destroyed more enemy ships in one engagement than our sophisticated weapons managed in 3 battles. Perhaps there is something to learn from chaos. The argument continued for another hour, with some officers demanding detailed tactical analyses and others insisting that human methods were too primitive to be useful. Finally, Admiral Zara called for quiet. Captain Morrison, she said, her black mirror eyes focusing on him. You will share your combat data with all fleet commanders. Any ship that wishes to experiment with your methods has permission to do so. However, the primary fleet will continue to use established tactical doctrine. Jake nodded, though he could see that Admiral Krell was not happy with even this small compromise. As the meeting broke up, several younger officers approached him with questions about kinetic weapons and improvised explosives. Commander Thex was particularly interested in the shrapnel device that Lisa Park had created. Your engineer sounds quite creative, Thex said as they walked toward the docking bays. Would she be willing to share her techniques with our technical staff? You'll have to ask her yourself, Jake replied. But I should warn you, Lisa has some unusual ideas about what constitutes safe engineering practices. 2 weeks later, the Defiance was leading a small group of coalition ships on what Admiral Krell called a harassment mission. Their job was to attack Void Hunter supply lines and communication nodes, staying mobile and avoiding major confrontations. It was exactly the kind of assignment that Jake would have complained about 3 months ago, but now he understood its importance. The supply convoy they were hunting was protected by only 6 Void Hunter ships, but those 6 had already destroyed 2 coalition patrol groups using standard tactics. Jake's mixed squadron included the Zentari cruiser Valor, 2 Vex destroyers, and a collection of smaller ships whose commanders were willing to try something different. Contact bearing 27, Mark IV, reported Amy Rodriguez from her navigation station. 6 enemy vessels in standard escort formation, protecting what looks like 3 cargo ships. Jake studied the tactical display. The enemy formation was perfect, as always. Mathematical precision designed to provide maximum protection with minimum risk. Commander Thex, are your modifications ready? Thex's voice came through the communication system with barely controlled excitement. Ready, Captain Morrison. We have replaced our forward plasma cannons with magnetic acceleration systems, similar to your railguns. Our engineering staff is still arguing about whether this will work or explode our ship, but they are ready to find out. Jake smiled. Over the past 2 weeks, he had discovered that Commander Thex was exactly the kind of officer that every military needed. Someone who was willing to try new ideas even when everyone else said they were impossible. All ships execute attack pattern Morrison 7. Morrison 7 was not actually a real attack pattern. Jake had made up the name because it sounded official, but the tactic was pure human improvisation. Instead of approaching in formation, each ship would attack from a different angle at a different time, using whatever weapons seemed most likely to cause confusion. The Vex destroyers went first, launching clouds of small missiles that used chemical explosives instead of antimatter warheads. The Void Hunter ships adapted quickly, deploying defensive fields designed to stop the incoming missiles. But the fields were calculated to stop sophisticated guided weapons, not simple bombs that exploded when they hit anything solid. While the enemy was distracted by the missile attack, Commander Thex brought the Valor in from the side, firing railgun rounds that punched through Void Hunter armor like paper. The enemy ships tried to adapt, but kinetic energy followed the same laws of physics everywhere in the universe. The Defiance attacked last, using the confusion to get close enough for Lisa Park's latest creation. She called it the Confusion Generator, and it was exactly what it sounded like. Instead of trying to destroy enemy ships, it fired hundreds of different types of small projectiles in random directions. Ball bearings, metal fragments, explosive pellets, smoke charges, and even bundles of reflective chaff that interfered with enemy sensors. The Void Hunter formation fell apart. Their perfect tactical algorithms could not process an attack that had no pattern, no logic, and no clear objective. While they tried to adapt to one type of projectile, 3 others were hitting them from different angles. Enemy ships are breaking. Formation, reported Pete Johnson. Their communication chatter is getting chaotic. It sounds like they're arguing with each other. Jake watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The Void Hunters were machines, and machines needed clear data to make decisions. When faced with random, illogical attacks, their decision-making systems overloaded, trying to find patterns that did not exist. All ships concentrate fire on the cargo vessels, don't let them escape. The supply ships were destroyed within minutes, along with 4 of their escorts. The remaining 2 Void Hunter ships fled, broadcasting distress signals that the Coalition's computers still could not translate. As the squadron regrouped, Jake received congratulations from his fellow commanders. But the most important message came from Dr. Nancy Wright in the Defiance's medical bay. "Captain, I've been studying the enemy transmissions that Pete recorded during the battle. I think I understand something important about how the Void Hunters operate." "What did you find, Nancy?" "They're not just adapting to our weapons, sir. They're trying to adapt to our thinking. Each time we use logical, predictable tactics, they learn our patterns and develop counters. But when we do something illogical, their learning algorithms get confused." Jake thought about this as he watched the other ships in his squadron. Commander Thex was already planning modifications to his ship's weapons systems. The Vex destroyer. Captains were discussing new types of improvised explosives. Even some of the more conservative officers were beginning to ask questions about human tactical methods. "Nancy, are you saying that our greatest weapon is our ability to be unpredictable?" "Exactly, Captain. Every military academy in the galaxy teaches officers to be logical, efficient, and predictable. But humans seem to have a natural talent for being illogical, inefficient, and completely unpredictable. Against an enemy that learns by finding patterns, that might be exactly what we need." As they headed back to Coalition Station Omega, Jake realized that the war was changing. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were learning to fight like humans, embracing chaos and improvisation over mathematical precision. The Void Hunters had made a critical error. They had assumed that intelligence meant predictability, that advanced civilizations would always choose optimal solutions to tactical problems. They had never encountered a species that considered suboptimal solutions to be tactical advantages. They were about to learn that sometimes the best way to win a war was to fight like you had no idea what you were doing. The alarms screaming through Coalition Station Omega were different this time. Not the steady warning of an approaching threat, but the desperate shriek of total emergency. Jake Morrison ran through the corridors toward the command center, dodging panicked civilians and grim-faced officers. The Void Hunters had found Earth. The main display in the command center showed a sight that made Jake's blood run cold. Thousands of enemy ships hung in space around humanity's home world like a mechanical storm cloud. More ships than had ever been seen in one place. The entire Void Hunter fleet, committed to destroying the planet that had produced the tactical chaos that was ruining their perfect war. "Report," Admiral Zara demanded as Jake entered the room. "The enemy has bypassed our outer defenses completely," said the Vex sensor operator, his forearms working frantically at his controls. They appeared in the Sol system using some kind of quantum tunneling technology. Earth's orbital defenses are already under attack. Jake stared at the display. He could see Earth's space elevators collapsing under enemy fire. The lunar mining stations were burning. Mars Command had gone silent. Everything that humanity had built over 3 centuries was being systematically destroyed. "How long do we have?" asked Commander Thex. The young Zentari officer had become one of Jake's closest allies, and his ship Valor was now equipped with a bewildering array of improvised weapons. At their current rate of destruction, approximately 6 hours before, Earth's population centers are targeted, Admiral Zara replied. The Coalition fleet can reach the Sol system in 4 hours, but we will be outnumbered 10 to 1. Admiral Krell spoke from his position near the tactical displays. We should evacuate what population we can and fall back to defensive positions around the core worlds. Earth cannot be saved. Jake felt something cold and angry settle in his chest. No. Every alien in the room turned to look at him. Admiral Krell's yellow eyes blazed with irritation. Captain Morrison, this is not a time for human emotional responses. The tactical situation is hopeless. The tactical situation is exactly what we need, Jake said, an idea forming in his mind. Admiral Zara, what if we don't try to save Earth? What if we use it as bait? The silence in the command center was complete. Jake could hear the air recycling systems and the distant hum of the station's power generators. Explain, Admiral Zara said finally. Jake moved to the main display, his hands shaking slightly as he began to outline his plan. The Void Hunters want to destroy Earth because they think it's our command center, right? They've committed their entire fleet to make sure humanity can't cause any more tactical problems. But what if Earth isn't really defenseless, Guy? Captain, said Commander Thex slowly, what are you suggesting? Lisa Park has spent the last month working with engineers from every species in the Coalition. They've been converting civilian ships into weapons platforms, cargo haulers with hidden missile launchers, mining ships with improvised railguns, even passenger liners with surprise packages in their cargo holds. Jake's fingers danced over the display controls, showing ship positions throughout the Sol system. Right now, the Void Hunters think they're attacking a helpless planet defended by a few obsolete patrol ships. They don't know about the 1,000 civilian vessels hiding behind Earth's moon and in the asteroid belt. Ships that look like refugees, fleeing the system. Admiral Zara's Black Mirror eyes reflected the tactical display. You want to turn the entire Sol system into a trap. The biggest, messiest, most chaotic trap in galactic history, Jake confirmed. When the Void Hunters commit to destroying Earth, we spring every surprise we have at once. No coordination, no battle plan, just pure human-style chaos on a massive scale. Admiral Krell made a sound like grinding metal. It is insane. It violates every principle of military strategy. Exactly, said Jake. That's why it might work. 3 hours later, the Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Jake stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching Earth grow larger on the main screen. His homeworld looked peaceful from this distance, but he knew that millions of people in the underground shelters were counting on what happened in the next few hours. Captain, said Amy Rodriguez from Navigation, I'm reading over 3,000 Void Hunter ships in Earth orbit. They're arranged in a perfect siege formation. Pete, are you picking up the civilian fleet? Yes, sir. Operation Chaos is ready to begin. 1,047 ships are standing by, including cargo haulers, mining vessels, cruise ships, and at least 12 vessels that Engineer Park describes as mobile disasters waiting to happen. Jake smiled. Lisa Park had outdone herself. Working with volunteers from across the galaxy, she had turned every available civilian ship into an improvised weapon of war. Some carried conventional missiles, others had been loaded with the strangest collection of destructive devices ever assembled. There were ships full of industrial chemicals that would create toxic clouds when released. Cargo haulers packed with ball bearings and explosives. Even a luxury cruise ship that had been converted into a giant shotgun, designed to fire its entire passenger lounge at enemy vessels. All ships, this is Captain Morrison, Jake announced over the general communication frequency. In 60 seconds, we show the galaxy what happens when humans get creative. Remember, there is no plan, there is no coordination, just hit them with Everything you have and try not to hit each other. The Void Hunter fleet hung around Earth like a mechanical spider web, their ships perfectly positioned for maximum destructive efficiency. They had calculated the optimal approach for planetary bombardment, accounting for orbital mechanics, defensive capabilities, and atmospheric interference. They had not calculated for what Lisa Park called the universe's biggest surprise party. "Execute," Jake ordered. The space around Earth exploded into chaos. 1,000 hidden ships emerged from behind asteroids, moons, and orbital debris. They came from every direction at once, firing weapons that made no sense and following attack patterns that violated every law of military tactics. A cargo ship full of frozen waste products rammed a Void Hunter cruiser, coating its hull with material that interfered with its sensors. A mining vessel used its rock-cutting lasers to slice through enemy armor while spinning like a drill. The luxury cruise ship fired its passenger lounge at 3 enemy ships simultaneously, the elegant furniture and decorative plants spreading across space like the galaxy's most expensive shotgun blast. "Enemy formation is collapsing," reported Ben Carter from his weapons station. "They're trying to adapt, but there are too many different attack types happening at once." Jake watched the tactical display with growing amazement. The Void Hunter ships were designed to learn and adapt, but they needed patterns to analyze. What was happening around Earth had no patterns. It was pure, beautiful chaos. "Captain," said Dr. Nancy Wright from her medical station, "I'm monitoring enemy communications. Their learning algorithms are overloading. They're trying to process attacks from industrial equipment, farming tools, kitchen appliances, and what appears to be a weaponized garbage disposal system." The battle raged for 2 hours. When it was over, the space around Earth was filled with debris from both sides, but the Void Hunter fleet was finished. Their perfect ships had been destroyed by an enemy that fought with no logic, no coordination, and no sense of what was militarily possible. Jake sat in his captain's chair, exhausted but smiling. Around him, his crew was celebrating with quiet satisfaction. They had saved Earth, but more than that, they had proven something important. "Sir," said Amy quietly, "Admiral Zara is requesting a communication." The main screen flickered, showing Admiral Zara standing in the Coalition Command Center. Behind her, officers from every species in the Alliance were working together, sharing data and planning for the future. "Captain Morrison," Admiral Zara said, "on behalf of the Galactic Defense Coalition, I want to thank you and your crew. Your tactical innovations have saved not just Earth, but potentially every world in the galaxy. We just did what humans do best, Admiral. We improvised." "Indeed. Which is why the Coalition Council has voted to establish the Human Tactical Command, with you as its director. Your mission will be to teach other species the value of creative thinking over rigid doctrine." Jake looked around his bridge at the crew that had followed him into impossible situations and somehow found ways to win. Amy Rodriguez, who could navigate through chaos better than any computer. Ben Carter, who could hit targets that didn't want to be hit. Pete Johnson, who could find signals in any noise. Lisa Park, who could build weapons out of spare parts and determination. Dr. Nancy Wright, who understood that sometimes healing meant fighting for what mattered. "Admiral," Jake said, "I think we can do that. After all, the galaxy is a big place and there's always room for a little more chaos." The war was over, but Jake knew that the real work was just beginning. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the best solutions came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes you needed to think like a human to save the universe. Sometimes the dumbest warship turned out to be exactly what everyone needed.